From the frozen rivers of the Ice Age to discoveries pulled from the deepest layers of the Earth, 2025 has quietly become one of the most disruptive years in the history of archaeology. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Whether you're watching or just listening, the story will unfold either way. And if you're enjoying these long-form deep dives, you already know how much your support helps keep them going. For a long time, the story of human progress felt reassuringly simple. Stone tools came first, then farming, then villages, then cities. A slow, steady climb from instinct to intelligence. But this year, the ground itself started arguing back. Across multiple continents, discoveries emerged that didn't just add details to our past. They contradicted the order of events entirely. Evidence of advanced planning appeared far earlier than expected. Signs of engineering surfaced where we assumed brute survival. And traces of human ingenuity showed up in eras we once dismissed as cognitively primitive. To understand why 2025 matters, we need to begin not with empires or monuments, but with materials. Deep in northern Tanzania, in a landscape often called the Grand Canyon of human evolution, archaeologists have spent decades studying Oldowan stone tools. These are some of the earliest known artifacts made by human ancestors, simple choppers and flakes struck from river stones. Effective, but crude. This year, however, researchers shifted their focus away from stone. What they found instead was bone, a collection of bone tools, deliberately shaped and carefully modified, dated to 1.5 million years ago. That date alone is staggering. It places these artifacts firmly in the time of Homo erectus and Paranthropus boisei, species with brains significantly smaller than ours, long assumed to be limited to basic survival behaviors. But bone is not an easy material to work. Unlike stone, which fractures predictably, bone has structure. It bends, it splinters, it contains layers of dense outer cortex and spongy interior. To shape it without destroying it requires understanding, not instinct, but technique. These early humans had that understanding. Microscopic analysis revealed controlled grinding, scraping, and polishing. Specific long bones were selected, shapes were planned. Some tools were smoothed into spatula-like implements for digging tubers or processing plants. Others showed wear patterns consistent with repeated, intentional use. And then there were the barbs. Barbed points represent a conceptual leap. A sharp edge wounds. A barb is designed to stay embedded. It implies anticipation of movement, resistance, escape. It suggests hunting strategies that go beyond opportunism, possibly even early projectile technology. This discovery forces a difficult realization. The design mind did not appear suddenly with Homo sapiens. It was already there, quietly operating, more than 1 million years earlier. While these early engineers were learning to exploit material properties in Africa, another group of humans was doing something just as unexpected. They were walking into Europe. For decades, archaeologists believed Europe was a late destination. Too cold, too dangerous, too full of apex predators. The prevailing theory, sometimes called Fortress Europe, suggested early humans simply weren't equipped to survive there. That assumption collapsed in northern Spain. In a cave system known as Cima del Elefante, researchers uncovered a partial human face, an upper jaw and cheekbone. Using advanced dating techniques, the remains were placed between 1.2 and 1.4 million years old. This is now the oldest human face ever found in Europe. And it shouldn't be there. The implications are profound. These hominins crossed continents far earlier than expected, adapting to unfamiliar climates, new predators, and long, brutal winters, likely without fire technology as we understand it. Even more unsettling is the face itself. Rather than appearing primitive, it shows surprisingly modern features. Flatter, more vertical than some later species. It hints that traits we associate with ourselves may have evolved, disappeared, and re-emerged across different human lineages. Together, the Tanzanian bone tools and the Spanish face rewrite the opening chapters of our story. Early humans were not waiting for intelligence to arrive. They were already experimenting, adapting, and pushing into the unknown. And this is only where the disruption begins. If the discoveries in Africa and Spain forced us to reconsider when intelligence appeared, the next wave of evidence challenges something even deeper. who was intelligent, and how many versions of humanity once shared the planet. For most of the last century, our family tree was drawn like a ladder, one species replacing another in a tidy progression, each step leading inevitably toward us. But real trees don't grow that way. They branch, they overlap, they compete for light. And in 2025, one of those forgotten branches finally gained a face. The story begins, oddly enough, almost a century ago. In 1933, during the Japanese occupation of northeastern China, a laborer working on a bridge near the Songhua River struck something solid in the mud. What he uncovered was unmistakably human, but unlike anything he had ever seen. The skull was massive, thick brow ridges, deep eye sockets, a cranium built for a different world. Fearing the occupying forces would confiscate it, the man hid the skull in a well behind his home. There it remained, silent and submerged, for decades. Only shortly before his death did he reveal the secret. In 2025, after years of careful analysis, scientists finally completed a full study of the Harbin skull. The conclusion was unavoidable. This was not Homo sapiens. It wasn't Neanderthal. And it wasn't Denisovan, at least not in the way we understood Denisovans before. Researchers named the species Homo longi, dragon man. The skull dates to at least 146,000 years ago, during a brutal ice age. And despite its imposing, rugged structure, the brain inside was comparable in size to our own. This was not a primitive brute. It was a large-brained human, adapted for extreme cold, likely capable of complex thought, planning, and social organization. But the real shock came from genetics. For years, scientists had tracked a mysterious signal in modern human DNA, what they called a ghost lineage. Denisovan genes appear in populations across Tibet, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, granting adaptations like high-altitude survival. Yet, the fossil record offered almost nothing in return. A finger bone, a few teeth, no face. The Harbin skull may be that face. Evidence now suggests that Dragon Man and the Denisovans are either closely related or the same lineage entirely. The fossil record has finally caught up with the genetic one, which means that while Neanderthals dominated Europe, another large-brained human species was thriving in East Asia, mastering cold environments, hunting massive animals, and evolving along a path parallel to our own. We were never alone, and this realization doesn't just complicate our ancestry, it destabilizes it. If multiple intelligent human species coexisted, then survival wasn't about being smarter, it was about being luckier. Climate shifts, geography, small population numbers, random catastrophe. The disappearance of these other humans wasn't inevitable progress, it was contingency, and that idea becomes even harder to ignore when we look at the landscapes they moved through. Places that no longer exist at all. Because while Dragon Man was ruling the frozen north of Asia, other humans were walking across territory that modern maps insist was impossible. Not by boat, but on foot, and to see how that worked, we need to look beneath the Mediterranean itself. To understand how humans reach places they were never supposed to reach, we first have to let go of the modern map. What we see today, coastlines, seas, islands, feels permanent. But for most of human history, it wasn't. During the long ice ages of the Pleistocene, vast amounts of the world's water were locked inside glaciers. Sea levels dropped hundreds of feet. Entire landscapes appeared, flourished, and vanished again without leaving a trace above the waves. And in 2025, evidence surfaced that one of the most important of these lost worlds wasn't a barrier at all. It was a corridor. The Aegean Sea, which now separates Anatolia from Greece, has long been viewed as a hard boundary. Archaeologists assumed early humans could only cross it after developing seaworthy boats. This assumption quietly shaped our entire timeline of European migration. But along the modern coastline of western Turkey, near the district of Ayvalık, researchers found something that shouldn't be there: stone tools. Not washed-in debris, not random fractures. Carefully shaped implements made using the Levallois technique, a sophisticated method associated with Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens. These tools date to between 300,000 and 50,000 years ago, and they were sitting right at the water's edge. Geological reconstruction explains why. Lower sea levels would have drained the Aegean basin almost completely. The islands we know today, Lesbos, Chios, Samos, were not islands at all. They were hilltops rising above a vast, fertile plain. Rivers crossed it, herds grazed on it, humans walked it. This wasn't an icy land bridge like Beringia. It was a grassland highway. The implications ripple outward. Animals found on Greek islands, hippopotamuses, pygmy elephants, giant deer, were never strong swimmers. They didn't cross open water. They lived on land that no longer exists. And humans lived alongside them. The tools found in Turkey are likely the peripheral remains of camps set up on higher ground overlooking this vanished landscape. The heart of these settlements now lies beneath hundreds of feet of water, beyond reach, preserved only as negative space in the archaeological record. But this wasn't a short-lived episode. For thousands of years, people inhabited this corridor, hunting, traveling, adapting, until the climate shifted again. As the ice melted, the sea returned. Slowly, relentlessly, it drowned the plain. Valleys became bays. Ridges became islands. Homes disappeared without a collapse, without fire, without ruins. Just water. This changes how we understand migration. Humans didn't wait until technology made travel safe. They moved while the world itself was still rearranging. And this pattern, settling landscapes that later vanish, will appear again and again, because some of the most important chapters of human history were written on terrain that no longer exists, including entire ways of life that left no descendants at all. And to find one of those, we have to leave the coastlines behind and follow the trail into human DNA. For a long time, archaeologists believed that once humans crossed into the Americas, the story became simple. One migration, one direction, one people spreading rapidly across an empty land. That idea no longer survives. In 2025, a genetic discovery revealed that the peopling of South America was not just complex, but tragically incomplete. Entire human lineages rose, adapted, and vanished without leaving a single descendant alive today. They exist only as a signal in ancient DNA. Researchers analyzing genomes from ancient burials across Argentina, Chile, and southern Brazil began noticing something strange. Certain individuals carried genetic markers that did not match any known indigenous population, past or present. These markers were not Denisovan, not Neanderthal, not part of the main ancestral line that gave rise to modern Native Americans. At first, the anomaly was dismissed as contamination or statistical noise, but it kept appearing again and again. Eventually, the data became undeniable. What scientists had uncovered was a ghost lineage, a population that split from the main wave of early Americans thousands of years ago and then evolved in isolation for nearly 5 millennia. To understand why this is so unsettling, you need to understand how migration usually works. In open landscapes like grasslands, people mix. They trade, they intermarry, genes flow freely. Over time, distinct populations blur together. But the pampas of South America tell a different story. This vast region, flat, fertile, and seemingly open, should have been a genetic crossroads. Instead, it acted like an island. The ghost population lived alongside other groups, yet remained separate. Genetic data shows minimal mixing, suggesting strong social boundaries, cultural isolation, or perhaps ecological specialization so precise that contact was limited by necessity rather than geography. Archaeology offers fragments of context. These people hunted megafauna, giant ground sloths, prehistoric horses, using distinctive fishtail projectile points found nowhere else. When the climate changed and those animals vanished, the ghost lineage adapted again, shifting to hunting guanaco and rhea, inventing tools like boladoras, weighted cords designed to entangle prey. Their burials were deliberate and symbolic. Bodies painted with red ochre, carefully arranged offerings, clear evidence of ritual and belief. This was not a marginal group struggling to survive. This was a successful culture. And then, sometime around 1,000 years ago, the genetic signal ends, abruptly. No gradual blending, no slow decline, just absence. By the time Europeans arrived in the 16th century, the people living in the pampas were genetically different. The ghost lineage had already disappeared. What happened? The data cannot tell us. Possibilities range from climate shifts that opened migration routes for rival groups, to disease, to violent displacement. Or perhaps a slow erosion, resources thinning, social structures fracturing, numbers falling until the lineage crossed a point of no return. What matters is not the cause, but the implication. Human history includes extinctions we never recorded. Entire languages, cosmologies, and memories erased long before written history ever began. And this was not an isolated case. While geneticists were uncovering a lost people in South America, archaeologists in North America were discovering something equally disruptive. Evidence that early Americans were not just wandering survivors, but builders. In the high desert of New Mexico, at a site called Gypsum Overlook, excavators found architecture dating to 8,800 years ago. Not camps, homes, semi-subterranean structures carefully dug into the ground, using earth itself as insulation against extreme temperatures. These were engineered spaces, designed to be lived in year after year. Inside, hearths lined with stones chosen specifically for their thermal properties, stones that absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly at night. This is not what nomads build. This is what people build when they plan to stay. The discovery challenges one of archaeology's most persistent assumptions, that early Americans were constantly mobile, reacting passively to environmental change. Instead, these people were shaping their environment. They were creating microclimates, planning for seasons, investing labor in permanence. When you place Gypsum Overlook beside the South American ghost lineage, a new pattern emerges. The Americas were not filled by a single wave of generic hunter-gatherers. They were populated by diverse groups experimenting with different strategies, some isolating themselves, some settling down, some thriving for thousands of years before disappearing entirely. The continent was not a blank canvas. It was crowded with human possibilities, and many of those possibilities failed. This realization forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. We are not the inevitable outcome of history. We are the survivors of a long series of trials, biological, cultural, environmental, most of which ended in extinction. The people of the Pampas were as human as we are. They loved, planned, taught their children, buried their dead. They adapted again and again to changing conditions. And yet they are gone, not conquered by empires, not erased by colonization, but lost quietly, long before anyone was writing names down. Their disappearance reminds us that survival is not guaranteed by intelligence alone. It depends on chance, on timing, on forces beyond control. As archaeology and genetics continue to advance, more ghost populations will likely emerge. More forgotten branches of our family tree will step briefly into view before vanishing again into data points and probability curves. And with each one, the story of humanity becomes less triumphant and more honest. Because history is not just about those who endured, it is also about those who almost did, and whose worlds ended without witnesses. For centuries, the Amazon rainforest was treated as a contradiction, too green to be empty, too hostile to be civilized. Western explorers told stories of vast cities hidden beneath the canopy, but historians dismissed them as exaggerations, hallucinations born of heat, hunger, and ambition. The dominant belief hardened into certainty. The Amazon could not support large, complex societies. The soil was too poor, the jungle too aggressive. Any attempt at urban life would be swallowed almost immediately. In 2025, that certainty collapsed, not because a city was found, but because hundreds of them were revealed at once. The breakthrough came from the Upano Valley in eastern Ecuador, a rugged region where the Andes descend into the Amazon basin. On foot, the landscape looks chaotic. Dense forest, steep slopes, tangled undergrowth. Archaeologists had long suspected something was there. Pottery shards, artificial-looking mounds, straight edges where none should exist, but the forest erased context. So researchers turned to LiDAR. From aircraft overhead, billions of laser pulses pierced the canopy. Most bounced off leaves, some reached the ground. When the vegetation was digitally stripped away, what remained was not wilderness. It was a cityscape, actually a network. More than 100 square miles of engineered terrain emerged from the data. Over 6,000 earthen platforms arranged around plazas in geometric patterns. Long, straight roads, some nearly 30 feet wide, connecting settlements like arteries. Drainage canals crisscrossing the valley floor, transforming swamp into farmland. This was not accidental growth, it was design. The platforms themselves were monumental acts of labor. Built entirely from earth, some rising over 10 feet high, they created stable foundations for wooden structures now long gone. Stone was scarce here, so these people became master geoengineers, reshaping hills, filling ravines, moving thousands of tons of soil with coordinated effort. Population estimates are staggering. At its peak, the Upano Valley likely supported 10,000 to 30,000 people, comparable to Roman London at the same time. And the timeline is just as shocking. Radiocarbon dating places the beginning of this urban network around 500 BCE, flourishing for over 1,000 years until roughly 600 CE. While Rome rose and fell, while empires clashed across Eurasia, a fully developed Amazonian civilization thrived in near-total obscurity. The structure of the city reveals a different philosophy of urban life. This was not a dense stone core surrounded by wilderness. It was a garden city, low density, integrated with agriculture, where habitation and cultivation blurred together. Fields, canals, homes, and ceremonial spaces coexisted in a continuous human-shaped landscape. Water management was the key. The Amazon floods relentlessly. Without control, settlement is impossible. The Upano engineers solved this with an intricate drainage system that redirected excess water while preserving soil fertility. They cultivated maize, manioc, and sweet potatoes on an almost industrial scale. This was sustainability, not accident, and then gradually it ended. There is no evidence of conquest, no layers of ash, no mass graves. The platforms were abandoned, not destroyed. The jungle reclaimed the earthworks slowly, patiently, until they disappeared beneath roots and leaves. The civilization did not vanish. It dissolved back into the forest. This discovery forces a radical re-evaluation of the Amazon. The rainforest is not pristine wilderness. It is an overgrown cultural landscape. Human hands shaped it for millennia. The biodiversity we see today may itself be a legacy of ancient management, selective planting, soil enrichment, controlled burning. When the people left, the forest grew back over their work, preserving it invisibly. And this is likely only the beginning. LiDAR has scanned only a fraction of the Amazon basin. If one valley holds a city of this scale, others almost certainly do as well. Entire civilizations may still lie hidden beneath the canopy, their outlines waiting for the right algorithm to reveal them. While the Amazon was hiding its cities under green, another jungle, far to the north, was hiding something different. In Guatemala, within the Mirador Calakmul Basin, archaeologists have long studied the rise of Maya civilization. The classic period, with its towering temples and carved stelae, dominated attention. What came before was treated as primitive, a slow warm-up before greatness. That assumption did not survive 2025. Using LiDAR and ground survey, researchers uncovered a massive pre-classic Maya urban complex dating back to around 800 BCE. Three major centers, Los Abuelos, Petnal, and Cambal, formed a single integrated system. At Petnal, a pyramid over 100 feet tall rose from the jungle floor. At this date, that scale should not exist. But stone was not the most important discovery. Water was. The northern Maya lowlands are a hydrological paradox. During the rainy season, the land floods. During the dry season, it becomes a desert. There are no permanent rivers. Survival depends entirely on water control. At Cambal, archaeologists found an advanced canal and reservoir system lined with stucco, a waterproof plaster made by burning limestone at high temperatures. Producing it required enormous amounts of fuel, labor, and chemical knowledge. These canals were precisely graded, using gravity to move water where it was needed. They prevented erosion during floods and stored reserves for drought. This was not improvisation. It was hydraulic engineering. The presence of astronomical complexes known as E-groups confirms something even deeper. These structures functioned as solar observatories, tracking solstices and equinoxes with architectural precision. Timekeeping, agriculture, and ritual were already synchronized centuries earlier than expected. The Maya did not stumble into complexity. They engineered it. The implication is profound. The classic Maya inherited a fully formed tradition. Their cities were not sudden explosions of genius, but the visible peaks of a much older foundation. Together, the Amazonian garden cities and the pre-classic Maya waterworks tell the same story from different worlds. Civilization does not require stone walls or written records to be real. It does not announce itself loudly. It can exist in earth, wood, and water, and vanish without collapse. History has favored what survives best: stone temples, metal weapons, written words. But much of humanity's greatest experimentation happened in materials that rot, erode, and disappear. In mud, in plants, in landscapes themselves. And only now, with technologies that can see through forests and beneath soil, are we beginning to understand how much of our past was never truly lost. It was just hidden, waiting for us to learn how to look. For most of modern history, the Eurasian steppe was described with a single word: empty. A vast ocean of grass stretching from Eastern Europe to Mongolia, inhabited by people who were always moving, always temporary. Nomads, herders, riders of horses who left little behind except burial mounds and stories written by their enemies. Civilization, we were told, required cities. Cities required walls. Walls required permanence. And the steppe had none of that. In 2025, that assumption collapsed under the weight of Earth. In northeastern Kazakhstan, near a bend in a river that cuts through rolling grasslands, archaeologists confirmed the existence of something that was never supposed to be there. A city, not a camp, not a seasonal gathering place. A planned industrial urban center dating back to around 1600 BCE, the height of the Bronze Age. The site is known as Semiyaka, sometimes called the City of Seven Ravines. For decades, its outline was invisible on the ground. Wind, rain, and grazing animals had softened every edge. The earthworks melted back into the steppe until they looked like natural hills. The first clues came not from archaeology, but from espionage. In the 1960s, Cold War spy satellites photographed the region. Decades later, when those images were declassified, researchers noticed faint geometric shadows, lines too straight, angles too deliberate to be natural. In 2025, teams returned with drones, magnetometry, and ground survey. What emerged was staggering. Semiyaka covered nearly 350 acres, making it one of the largest Bronze Age sites ever found in the region. Earthen walls outlined a rectangular city plan. Inside, rows of massive platforms were arranged in a strict grid. Grids do not happen by accident. A grid means planning, authority, coordination. At the center stood a large structure oriented east-west, likely a palace, administrative complex, or ritual center. This was not a loose collection of households. It was a city designed before it was built, but the most shocking discovery lay beneath the soil. Industrial waste, slag, broken crucibles, metal-rich debris. Chemical analysis revealed the city was a major center of bronze production. Bronze is not simple. It requires copper and tin. Copper is relatively common. Tin is not. The nearest significant tin sources lie hundreds of kilometers away in the Altai and Central Asian mountains. This means Semiyaka was part of a long-distance supply network stretching across the steppe, centuries before the Silk Road. The metallurgists here practiced co-smelting, a sophisticated technique combining ores to produce high-quality alloys with precise tin content. This is not experimental tinkering. It implies skilled specialists, trained artisans, whose full-time job was metal production. Specialists require support: food, security, organization. Semiyaka was not a nomadic accident. It was an economic engine. And then comes the question that changes everything. If steppe societies could build cities like this, why didn't they do it everywhere? The answer may lie in choice. Nomadism was not a lack of capability. It was a strategy. Mobile pastoralism allowed people to adapt to climate variability, avoid resource depletion, and move away from conflict. But when conditions favored stability, when trade routes converged, when metal production demanded fixed infrastructure, these same societies could stop moving and build. Semiyaka represents a moment when the steppe crystallized, a pause in motion, a deliberate experiment in permanence, and like many experiments in human history, it ended. There is no clear evidence of violent destruction, no mass graves, no burned layers. The city appears to have been abandoned gradually. Production ceased, structures eroded, people moved on. The steppe swallowed the city whole. From above, it vanished. This discovery forces a fundamental rethink of how we define civilization. The absence of ruins does not mean the absence of complexity. Sometimes it means the materials chosen were meant to return to the earth. While the steppe was hiding an industrial city in plain sight, another civilization was hiding something else entirely. A face. In southern Spain, along the Atlantic fringe, ancient writers spoke of a kingdom called Tartessos. The Greeks described it as wealthy beyond imagination, rich in silver, strategically placed between worlds. Then it disappeared. Archaeologically, Tartessos was frustrating. Metal hoards, trade goods, and imported luxury items were found, but almost no human representation. No statues, no portraits. It was assumed to be an aniconic culture, avoiding human imagery. In 2025, that assumption was destroyed. At the site of Casas del Turuñuelo, archaeologists uncovered 5 carved stone busts buried beneath the remains of a monumental building. These were not crude idols. They were highly detailed, naturalistic faces. 2 depicted women wearing elaborate earrings, ornaments known from elite Tartessian gold hoards. Their presence on statues suggests divine or priestly status. Another depicted a warrior wearing a crested helmet. For the first time, Tartessos had faces, and they were unmistakably human. The context was even more unsettling. The building in which they were found had been deliberately destroyed. Before its destruction, more than 50 animals, horses, cattle, pigs, dogs, were sacrificed in a single event. Horses were especially valuable. Killing so many at once suggests desperation or finality. After the sacrifice, the structure was filled in and sealed. This was not abandonment. It was ritual closure. The statues were buried intact, preserved by the very act meant to erase the site. What crisis triggered this ending remains unknown. Climate stress, political collapse, external threat, or something we cannot yet name. But the message is clear. Complex societies do not always fall with noise. Sometimes they end quietly, deliberately, turning away from the world they built. Together, Semillarca and Tartessos reveal a pattern that archaeology is only beginning to recognize. Civilizations do not follow a single path. They are not always stone-bound, urban, or linear. They can rise in grasslands and vanish without trace. They can flourish in wealth and erase themselves by choice. And most importantly, they are far more common than our textbooks ever allowed, because history does not preserve what mattered most. It preserves what lasted longest. And now, with new tools and new questions, we are finally beginning to see the civilizations that chose not to. For much of the ancient world, power was measured in visibility, temples that scraped the sky, statues that stared down generations, walls meant to announce permanence. But some of the most revealing discoveries of 2025 came from places designed to be unseen, hidden in cliffs, buried beneath sand, sealed away from both enemies and memory. These discoveries force us to confront a different kind of history, one shaped not by spectacle but by secrecy. High above the floor of the Judean desert, where limestone cliffs fracture into impossible angles and the Dead Sea shimmers far below, archaeologists found something that should not exist. It was not a cave. It was built, cut directly into a vertical cliff face. Reachable only by technical climbing, stood a small stepped pyramid, roughly 10 feet tall. Constructed from carefully shaped limestone blocks, it clung to the rock like a deliberate scar. Structures like this are known as nefesh monuments, memorial markers used in the Second Temple period to signify a burial, a sacred site, or a claim of presence. But this one had no tomb beneath it. No body, no settlement nearby, no road leading to it. Its very location defied logic. Why build a monument no one could easily see? The answer lay hidden inside. Excavation revealed a sealed cache concealed within the stonework. Inside were artifacts dating to the Ptolemaic period, around the 3rd century BCE, a time of brutal instability following the death of Alexander the Great. The eastern Mediterranean was in chaos. Ptolemaic Egypt and the Seleucid Empire fought repeatedly for control of the Levant. Judea sat between them, a contested corridor soaked in violence, rebellion, and shifting allegiances. The cache told the story. Silver tetradrachms minted in Alexandria and Tyre, pristine and unused. Iron spearheads, arrowheads, the remains of a composite bow made of wood, horn, and sinew. An extremely rare survival in the desert climate. And most importantly, papyrus documents. These were not religious texts like the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were logistical records, written in Greek and Aramaic, detailing troop movements, supply lines, and payments to mercenaries. This was a military outpost, a hidden one. The pyramid was not meant for pilgrims or worshippers. It was a marker for those who already knew, a signal carved into stone for watchers, rebels, or mercenary forces guarding the desert frontier. The money was never spent, the weapons were never reclaimed, which suggests only one ending. The outpost fell, either overrun, betrayed, or forced to flee so suddenly that its treasury was left behind, sealed in stone with the hope of return. They never came back. This discovery reframes the Judean desert entirely. It was not just a place of monks, prophets, and isolation. It was a militarized landscape, a chessboard of hidden positions, surveillance points, and secret garrisons. History happened here in silence, and silence preserved it. While one secret was hidden in stone, another waited in water. Off the southern coast of France, far below the reach of light, a French naval survey drone detected something unnatural resting on the seabed. At nearly 8,400 feet beneath the surface of the Mediterranean, where pressure would crush a human instantly, lay a wooden ship, perfectly upright. This was Camarat 4, a 16th century merchant vessel and the deepest wooden shipwreck ever discovered in French waters. Wooden ships almost never survive this long. In shallow seas, shipworms consume them, storms scatter them, salvagers strip them bare. But at extreme depth, oxygen is scarce, life slows, decay pauses. Camarat 4 became a time capsule. The hull remains intact, the ribs and planking clearly visible. The masts collapsed during descent, but the ship settled gently into sediment, as if laid there intentionally. This vessel sailed during the Renaissance, an era of empires, trade, and exploration. It was not a warship or a royal flagship. It was a working merchant ship, likely carrying grain, wine, oil, or textiles, and it was never looted. Its cargo still lies where it fell. Because of the depth, no diver has ever touched it. Excavation will require robotic arms controlled from the surface. Even removing a single artifact will take years of planning. But the promise is enormous. Merchant ships rarely tell their stories. We know kings and admirals. We know battles. But the everyday mechanics of trade, the objects, tools, and personal belongings of ordinary sailors are almost always lost. Camarat 4 preserves that world intact. The irony is striking. The Romans sealed their dead with lead to preserve memory. Sailors trusted oak and craftsmanship to survive the sea. Both failed, yet in failing, both succeeded. The lead coffin in Hungary, discovered in 2025, tells a parallel story. In the ancient Roman city of Aquincum, modern Budapest, archaeologists uncovered a limestone sarcophagus dating to the 3rd century CE. This alone was unusual. What made it extraordinary was the seal. The lid had been clamped shut with iron and sealed with molten lead, creating an airtight barrier. Grave robbers never penetrated it. Inside lay the remains of a young woman buried with astonishing care. Glass vessels intact, gold thread textiles preserved as microscopic traces, over 140 bronze coins placed with her body. This was wealth, protection, and ritual combined. The lead acted as a technological miracle, preserving organic traces for nearly 1,700 years. It turned the coffin into a capsule, freezing a moment of grief, status, and belief. But like Camarat 4, the intent failed. The woman did not achieve immortality. Instead, she achieved something else: visibility. Together, these discoveries reveal a paradox at the heart of archaeology. The past survives not because people intended it to, but because their efforts to control fate created conditions for preservation. A sealed coffin, a sunken ship, a hidden cache in a cliff. History waits where human plans ended. And this brings us to the final and most unsettling frontier revealed in 2025. Not hidden in earth or water, but hidden inside objects we could see all along. In the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, in the buried city of Herculaneum, lies the only complete library to survive from the ancient world, the Villa of the Papyri. When it was discovered in the 18th century, excavators found hundreds of scrolls, but they were useless. The volcanic heat had carbonized them, turning them into fragile lumps indistinguishable from charcoal. For over 250 years, every attempt to open them destroyed them. They were books no human could read. Until now. In 2025, advances in synchrotron X-ray imaging and artificial intelligence completed something that once seemed impossible. The scrolls were digitally unrolled, Not physically touched, not unwrapped, seen through. AI models trained to detect microscopic texture differences between ink and papyrus began reading letters, then words, then full columns of text. The first complete scroll revealed a philosophical work by Philodemus, an Epicurean thinker writing about pleasure, desire, and moderation. We are reading a book that burned in 79 CE, and this is only the beginning. Most of the villa remains unexcavated. Scholars believe a second library, possibly containing lost Latin literature, still lies buried. If found, we could recover works believed lost forever. The missing books of Livy, unknown plays, entire schools of thought erased by time. For the first time, history is not limited by preservation. It is limited only by patience. And what emerges from all these discoveries, hidden garrisons, sealed coffins, sunken ships, unreadable books, is a humbling realization. Human history is not loud. It is quiet. It hides in places no one thought to look, waiting centuries for the right tools, the right questions, and the humility to accept that the past does not owe us clarity. It offers fragments, and in those fragments, entire worlds. For most of modern history, archaeology has depended on what survives. Stone tools, broken walls, bones. Anything made of fiber, wood, leather, or plant matter was assumed to be gone forever. It rots, it dissolves, it disappears, which means our picture of the past has always been distorted. We built entire theories of ancient societies based almost entirely on stone, not because stone mattered most, but because stone endured. In 2025, that bias finally broke, not through speculation, not through myth, but through preservation so precise it felt intentional. On opposite sides of the world, two discoveries forced archaeologists to confront a difficult truth. Much of human intelligence was never meant to last, and yet, against all odds, fragments survived. The first discovery came from a muddy field in Lincolnshire, England, in the village of Norton Disney. It did not look important at first. Volunteer archaeologists were excavating a Roman-era site when their tools struck metal. Not a coin, not a weapon, something geometric, perfectly geometric. What emerged from the soil was a Roman dodecahedron, 12 pentagonal faces, 12 circular holes of different sizes, 20 small knobs at each vertex, hollow, balanced, beautiful. It was cast in bronze, about the size of a grapefruit, and preserved so well it looked newly made. This alone was remarkable. But what makes Roman dodecahedra extraordinary is not how rare they are, it is how silent they are. Over 130 have been found across the Roman Empire, Britain, Gaul, Germany, the Low Countries. And yet, in millions of surviving Roman texts, there is not a single reference to them. No name, no description, no illustration, no explanation. The Romans wrote about everything. They catalogued weapons, tools, rituals, taxes, plumbing, recipes, farming techniques, even jokes. But these objects, clearly deliberate, clearly valuable, are absent from the written record. The Norton Disney dodecahedron reignited a debate that has lasted more than 200 years. What were they for? Some theories suggest measuring devices, but the holes are inconsistent. Each object is different. That rules out standardized measurement. Others propose they were used for knitting gloves. Experiments show yarn can be looped through the holes. But why cast a knitting tool from expensive bronze? And why make each one unique? Astronomical instruments? Gaming objects? Candle holders? Ritual dice? The context of the Norton Disney find adds to the mystery. It was not discarded, it was placed. Found in a pit alongside pottery from the 3rd or 4th century CE, the object appears to have been intentionally deposited. That suggests meaning. Perhaps ritual meaning. In the late Roman world, especially in frontier provinces like Britain, belief systems blurred. Roman religion mixed with Celtic traditions. Astrology, magic, divination, and folk rituals flourished. The dodecahedron may have been an object whose function was cultural, not practical. A symbol, a ritual focus, a tool whose meaning was obvious to those who used it, and irrelevant to those who didn't. And when the culture that understood it vanished, the meaning vanished with it. The dodecahedron is not mysterious because it is complex. It is mysterious because its context died. Which brings us to the second discovery. And here, the story changes completely. In Cape York Peninsula, northern Australia, sandstone cliffs rise above dry creek beds and open woodland. Rock shelters dot the landscape, natural overhangs used by Aboriginal communities for tens of thousands of years. At a site called Windmill Way, archaeologists working with the Kuku Ya'u traditional owners excavated layers of sediment protected from rain and sun. What they found rewrote Australian archaeology. Fibre, hundreds of pieces of it, fragments of woven bags, fishing nets, binding cords, ceremonial textiles, more than 500 individual fibre artifacts, dating back around 1,300 years. This is unprecedented. Organic materials almost never survive in Australia's climate. Heat, insects, moisture, and time destroy them. Stone tools survive, fibre does not. Which is why Aboriginal technology has long been mischaracterized as simple, because stone survives. But Windmill Way tells a different story. Microscopic analysis revealed extraordinary sophistication. The fibres were carefully selected from specific plants. Bark stripped at precise stages of growth, twisted into two-ply string with consistent tension. Different weaving techniques were used for different purposes. Tight weaves for carrying seeds, open mesh for shellfish, reinforced edges for weight-bearing loads. The fishing nets show knot patterns identical to those still used by indigenous fishers today. This is not experimentation. This is mastery. And unlike the Roman dodecahedron, the meaning of these objects is not lost. Because the culture survived, the Kuku Ya'u people recognized the techniques immediately. They knew the knots. They knew the patterns. They knew which plants had been used. Oral tradition filled the gaps archaeology never could. But there is another detail that makes Windmill Way haunting. The artifacts stop abruptly. The last fibres date to 1874. That year marks the Palmer River gold rush. Thousands of European miners flooded the region. Violence followed. Displacement followed. The rock shelter was abandoned. In the final layers, archaeologists found foreign materials. A piece of hooked wire, a strip of red cloth, industrial objects, intrusions. The woven bags were left unfinished. Nets abandoned mid-repair. The site froze in time, not because of geology, but because a way of life was interrupted. This contrast is crucial. The Roman dodecahedron is silent because no one remains who remembers it. The Windmill Way fibres speak because the descendants of their makers are still here. Same object class, same archaeological mystery, different outcome. Together, these discoveries expose a fundamental flaw in how we understand history. We assume survival equals importance. It does not. Stone survives because it is durable, not because it mattered most. Fibre disappears because it decays, not because it mattered less. In fact, fibre technologies may have been more important than stone tools for most of human history. Bags enable transport, nets enable mass fishing, ropes enable construction, hunting, sailing, trapping. Civilization does not function without them, but they vanish, which means entire systems of knowledge have been invisible to us until preservation intervenes. This reframes everything we think we know about primitive societies. They were not limited by intelligence. They were limited by what survives for us to find. The Roman dodecahedron reminds us that even literate civilizations lose meaning when cultural continuity breaks. Windmill Way reminds us that oral knowledge can preserve meaning longer than stone. One object confounds us, the other explains itself. And that difference has nothing to do with technology. It has everything to do with survival. As archaeology enters an era of unprecedented tools, LiDAR, AI, synchrotron imaging, DNA sequencing, we are not just finding more artifacts. We are confronting the limits of interpretation. Because some objects do not want to be explained. They were never meant for us. They belong to closed worlds. Rituals, beliefs, practices, whose logic only existed within a living culture. When that culture ends, the object becomes a riddle. Not because it is complex, but because it is alone. And this may be the most unsettling lesson of 2025. History does not disappear evenly. It erodes selectively. It preserves stone and destroys fibre. It records emperors and forgets weavers. It remembers names and loses meanings. What we call the past is not what existed. It is what survived. And every year, as new discoveries emerge from mud, desert, jungle, and silence, we are forced to admit how much of humanity's story was never written for us to read. It was woven. For centuries, archaeology has been guided by a simple assumption. If something mattered, it would leave a trace, a wall, a monument, a grave, a name carved into stone. Power, we believed, announces itself loudly. In 2025, that belief began to collapse. Not because we found more ruins, but because we found places where power chose not to announce itself at all, and yet controlled everything. The discovery came from one of the most familiar landscapes in the ancient world, the Mediterranean Sea. a body of water so thoroughly studied, so densely mapped, that many assumed its secrets were already exhausted. They were wrong. Off the southern coast of France, near Ramatuelle, a French naval survey vessel was scanning the seabed using high-resolution sonar. The mission was not archaeological, it was routine. Then the instruments detected something that did not belong. At a depth of more than 2,500 meters, over 8,000 feet, far beyond the reach of divers, a shape appeared. It was long, symmetrical, wooden, a ship. This would become known as Camerat 4. It is the deepest wooden shipwreck ever discovered in French waters, and one of the deepest ancient shipwrecks found anywhere in the Mediterranean. The ship dates to the 16th century, the early modern world of merchants, empires, and expanding trade networks. At that depth, the conditions are brutal. Total darkness, near freezing temperatures, crushing pressure. But those same conditions preserve. Shipworms cannot survive there. Currents are weak. Oxygen levels are low. Time slows. When remotely operated vehicles descended and illuminated the wreck, the images were unnerving. The hull sits upright, as if still sailing. The ribs are intact. The planking is visible. The outline is complete. This ship did not explode. It did not burn. It sank. Likely driven off course by a sudden mistral storm, blown into deep water where it foundered and dropped straight down. No looting followed. No salvage. Everything that went down with it may still be there. This matters because Camerat 4 is not a warship. It is a merchant vessel. History remembers kings, admirals, and battles. It forgets the ships that actually moved the world. Merchant ships carried grain, wine, oil, textiles, metal ingots, tools, letters, personal belongings. They were the arteries of civilization. Yet most known shipwrecks are shallow, disturbed, stripped, scattered. Camerat 4 is sealed by physics, a time capsule of everyday economic life. Archaeologists do not plan to raise it. The wood would disintegrate. Instead, robotic arms will sample cargo, ceramics, coins, just enough to reconstruct its final voyage. One coin could fix its date. One amphora could reveal its trade route. One personal object could humanize the crew. At the bottom of the sea, a working world waits untouched. But this is not the only place where history hid itself in silence. Thousands of kilometers away, in the Judean desert, another discovery forced archaeologists to rethink what absence really means. This landscape is famous for caves, scroll caves, refuge caves, hiding places. For decades, teams rappelled down cliffs searching for texts like the Dead Sea Scrolls. In early 2025, they found something else, built into a sheer cliff face. Almost invisible unless you knew where to look, stood a small, step pyramid-like monument, constructed from carefully cut limestone blocks. It was not a natural formation, it was a nephesh. In Second Temple period architecture, a nephesh is a marker, a memorial, a signal of presence and authority. This one stood alone, far from settlements, accessible only by dangerous climbs. There was no tomb beneath it. Instead, inside a hidden cavity, archaeologists found a cache, silver coins, high-value tetradrachms minted in Alexandria and Tyre, weapons, iron spearheads, arrowheads, a rare composite bow preserved by desert aridity, and most importantly, documents, papyrus, written in Greek and Aramaic, military records, supply lists, payments to mercenaries, references to watchers of the Dead Sea and fortified positions. These documents date to the Ptolemaic period, around the 3rd century BCE, a time of relentless conflict between Hellenistic empires. Judea was not a backwater, it was a militarized frontier. This cliff monument was not religious decoration. It was infrastructure, a hidden outpost, a supply depot, a payroll cache. The silver was never spent. The weapons were never retrieved. The garrison vanished. No mass grave, no burned walls, just silence. The desert preserved their secret. Power does not always build palaces. Sometimes it builds invisibility. And this pattern repeats again. This time in Egypt. Near the Nile Delta, beneath murky waters, lies the sunken city of Canopus. Once a place of festivals, healing rituals, and excess. Then an earthquake liquefied the ground. The city slid into the sea. In 2025, underwater archaeologists uncovered one of its most imposing relics, a colossal sphinx carved from quartzite, one of the hardest stones in the ancient world. The statue bears the cartouche of Ramesses II. This means it was already ancient when Canopus thrived. An heirloom monument, reused to legitimize later power. Finding quartzite underwater is extraordinary. The material requires immense effort to quarry and carve. Nearby, divers recovered ritual objects tied to the Osiris mysteries, ceremonial ladles, offering tables, and Osiris beds used to grow sprouting grain in the shape of the god, symbolizing resurrection. Canopus was a paradox. Above water, indulgence, music, pleasure. Below water, ritual, death, rebirth. The Sphinx was found toppled, not dismantled, but thrown down by the earth itself. Earthquakes do not negotiate. They erase without intention. Across these discoveries, a new theme emerges. Power does not always want to be seen. Sometimes it hides in cliffs. Sometimes it sinks. Sometimes it operates quietly through trade, logistics, ritual, and supply lines. And archaeology, for all its tools, is still learning how to recognize those forms of power. Walls fall, stone crumbles, but silence can endure. The merchant ship did not need an inscription to matter. The cliff garrison did not need a city. The Sphinx did not need to stand forever to shape belief. They did their work and disappeared. This is the uncomfortable truth emerging from 2025. History is not just what was built to last. It is what functioned well enough to vanish. And the more we uncover these silent systems, the more we realize how much of human control, organization, and influence operated beneath the surface, unrecorded, uncelebrated, and until now, unseen. For a long time, history felt finished. The timelines were fixed. The migrations were mapped. The rise of civilization followed a clean, predictable arc. Stone tools, farming, cities, empires. What 2025 revealed is not that the past was misunderstood in small ways, but that the framework itself was incomplete. Again and again, this year forced archaeologists to confront the same pattern. Human capability appeared earlier than expected. Complexity emerged in places we were told to ignore. Civilizations flourished without stone, without writing, without permanence, and then they vanished. Not always in fire, not always in collapse. Sometimes by design, sometimes by adaptation, sometimes because the world changed faster than they could. The engineers of the Ice Age shaped bone into tools a million years before they were supposed to understand materials. Pioneers crossed into frozen Europe when textbooks said it was impossible. Entire human species thrived in the cold while we remained in the tropics. Cities rose in jungles, deserts, grasslands, and steppes, then melted back into earth and water. Knowledge was woven into fiber, spoken into memory, and carried in bodies instead of books. Even power learned to disappear. It moved through trade routes instead of walls, through bloodlines instead of laws, through symbols instead of armies, through silence instead of monuments. What survived was not what mattered most. What survived was what resisted decay. This is the quiet warning hidden in every discovery. We do not inherit the past as it was. We inherit the fragments it allowed to remain. And yet, with every LiDAR scan stripping away forest, every DNA sequence revealing a ghost population, every AI model reading ink burned 2,000 years ago, the past pushes back, not to give us certainty, but to remind us of humility, because the deeper we look, the clearer one truth becomes. Human history is not a straight line. It is a landscape, flooded, buried, erased, and rebuilt over and over again. What we call lost was once complete. What we call primitive was once sufficient, and what we call modern is just the latest arrangement of ideas that have appeared before under different names. The people of the past were not waiting to become us. They were already human. And somewhere beneath the ocean floor, under jungle canopies, inside sealed rooms, and in strands of forgotten fiber, their worlds are still there, patient, intact, and unfinished. History does not hide, it waits.